When people think of Paul McCartney, they imagine the charming Beatle, the man with the melodic bass lines, that warm grin, and an endless catalog of timeless songs. The writer of Yesterday, the cultural icon, who helped redefine what popular music could be. But behind the knighthood and polished public image lies a man with very strong opinions about his peers. Those who know him best have seen flashes of a far more competitive, uncompromising McCartney, one who, despite his cheerful demeanor, isn't afraid to speak his mind when the studio doors close. Paul can be brutally honest when it comes to music, revealed Denny Laine, former Wings guitarist, in a 2018 interview. There was always that friendly competition between us. He knew exactly what he liked and what he didn't. From the height of the British invasion to the rise of punk and beyond, McCartney's private opinions reveal not petty grudges, but deep artistic convictions about songwriting, creativity, and what real rock and roll should stand for. So, today, we're counting down the 6 bands Paul McCartney reportedly couldn't stand, and why even some of music's biggest names ended up on the receiving end of his sharpest critiques. 6. The Rolling Stones. The Beatles versus the Rolling Stones, a rivalry that defined an era. Publicly, it was a friendly competition. Privately, things could get tense. I've always thought the Rolling Stones were a blues cover band that got lucky. McCartney allegedly told producer George Martin during a late-night Abbey Road session in 1968. That remark stayed hidden for years, but his opinion eventually surfaced again, decades later. In a 2021 New Yorker interview, Paul admitted, "I'm not sure I should say it, but they're a blues cover band. That's sort of what the Stones are. I think our net was cast a bit wider than theirs." Mick Jagger didn't hesitate to fire back, joking that the Stones were still filling stadiums while that 4-piece with one drummer wasn't. McCartney's frustration seemed rooted in what he viewed as the Stones' narrow focus. Former Apple Records executive Peter Brown once revealed, Paul always felt the Stones were following in their footsteps, releasing similar album concepts months after the Beatles had already broken that ground. When John Lennon briefly considered producing a Stones record in 1969, McCartney was reportedly furious. According to engineer Jeff Emmerich, he asked, "Why would John waste his time on them when we've got our own work to do?" Even in later years, Paul couldn't quite hide his feelings. Asked about the rivalry in 2016, he smiled and said, "They're a great band, but they're just not the Beatles, are they?" 5. The Sex Pistols. If any genre clashed hardest with McCartney's musical philosophy, it was punk rock, and no band embodied that rebellion like the Sex Pistols. When the anarchic quartet burst onto the scene in 1976, tearing down everything the 60 Seconds had built, McCartney was reportedly horrified. Paul thought their music was an assault on his ears, revealed John Eastman, Linda McCartney's brother, in a 2003 interview. He couldn't understand why people were celebrating musicians who barely knew how to play. The feeling was mutual. During the week, God Save the Queen battled McCartney's Mull of Kintyre for chart dominance in 1977. Johnny Rotten sneered that Paul represented everything punk was fighting against. What hurt McCartney most wasn't their sound, it was their contempt. According to Wings drummer Denny Laine, Paul was genuinely upset when he heard the Pistols were using Beatles posters for target practice. He tried to laugh it off. Laine said, "But you could tell it stung." Tensions peaked when both acts were recording at London's AIR studios in early 1977. Studio manager Dave Harries recalled, "Paul tried to be friendly, introduced himself, and Sid Vicious muttered something about establishment sellouts. Paul turned on his heel and never looked back." Years later, McCartney conceded that punk had shaken things up, but when asked about the Sex Pistols directly, he offered only a polite shrug. "Not my cup of tea." "Really?" he said, with a tone that said far more than his words. 4. Oasis. Fast forward to the 1,990 seconds and the rise of Oasis, Britain's loudest Beatles disciples. Noel Gallagher openly idolized McCartney's songwriting, while Liam Gallagher tried to emulate his swagger. But Paul wasn't impressed. He found their Beatles obsession exhausting, revealed longtime publicist Jeff Baker. He thought they were reducing his life's work to a handful of recycled chords. At a 1,997 dinner, McCartney reportedly told George Martin, "They've got the attitude right, but where's the originality? We never just copied, we transformed." That didn't sit well when Noel Gallagher declared Oasis bigger than the Beatles in 1996. According to biographer Philip Norman, Paul privately called them arrogant upstarts, half the talent, twice the ego. The frostiness showed in person. At the 2000 Q Awards, Liam asked Paul for an autograph, and McCartney obliged, but witnesses said he looked visibly uncomfortable the entire time. Over the years, Paul softened slightly, acknowledging Oasis kept guitar music alive, but he never hid his disappointment. When asked about them in a 2018 GQ interview, his reply was short and telling, "Good songs, wish they'd found their own voice." 3. The Monkees. For McCartney, few bands represented artistic frustration like the Monkees. While fans saw them as lighthearted fun, Paul viewed them as a cynical imitation of the Beatles' success. Paul thought they were a plastic knockoff, recalled Beatles aide Alistair Taylor. He'd switch off the radio whenever their songs came on. Their TV show origins particularly bothered him. Unlike the Beatles, who had earned their stripes playing grueling club gigs in Hamburg, the Monkees had been cast for television. "They're four actors pretending to be a band," Paul reportedly told manager Brian Epstein in 1967. "It's insulting." When the Monkees began adding psychedelic touches after Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band came out, McCartney was furious. According to George Harrison, Paul grumbled, "They're copying our ideas without doing any of the work." At a Los Angeles party in 1968, McCartney even walked away mid-conversation with Mickey Dolenz, who later said, "I don't think he ever saw us as real musicians." Even decades later, McCartney's diplomacy couldn't hide his opinion. Asked about the Monkees in 2011, he said, "They had some catchy tunes, but they were certainly no Beatles, were they?" 2. The Bee Gees. The late 1970 seconds saw the Bee Gees dominate the charts with disco anthems just as McCartney's post-Wings career began to slow. Producer Chris Thomas remembered, "Paul felt blindsided by disco. The Gibb brothers were suddenly selling more records than the Beatles ever did, and he took it personally. What bothered him most was their transformation from melodic pop harmonies to glitzy dance floor kings." According to Wings guitarist Lawrence Juber, Paul would listen to their high-pitched vocals and mutter, "They've sold out their sound for a drum machine." Things grew icy when both acts recorded at the same Miami studio in 1979. Studio manager Tony Bongiovi said Paul would deliberately avoid the Bee Gees sessions. When someone mentioned they'd broken another record, you could see his jaw tighten, Bongiovi recalled. What infuriated him further was the critical praise they received. When the Bee Gees were hailed as songwriting geniuses, Paul reportedly scoffed to his bandmates, "They're using the same three chords as everyone else, they've just sped them up." Though McCartney never criticized them publicly, his silence was deafening. Even his brief, detached statement after Maurice Gibbs' passing in 2003 stood out for its lack of warmth. To Paul, their success symbolized a shift from heartfelt musicianship to glossy mass production. 1. The Beach Boys. Finally, at number 1, the Beach Boys, and more specifically, Brian Wilson. This was no petty feud, it was a creative rivalry that fueled some of the greatest music ever made. Paul and Brian were like chess masters, producer Phil Spector once said. Each move one made, the other tried to top. When McCartney first heard Pet Sounds in 1966, he was mesmerized and intimidated. According to George Martin, Paul listened to it non-stop, analyzing every chord. He'd say, "We have to go further than this," Martin recalled. That challenge directly inspired Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. But admiration turned sour. When Wilson's ambitious Smile project collapsed, McCartney was reportedly dismissive. "If you can't finish what you start, you shouldn't be in this business," he allegedly told road manager Mal Evans. Things worsened at a 1967 dinner at Brian's home. McCartney, attempting to give helpful feedback, called several Beach Boys songs simplistic. According to Dennis Wilson, Paul left thinking he'd been encouraging. Brian didn't speak for days. In later interviews, McCartney downplayed their influence. "They had lovely harmonies," he said in 1993, "but I think people overstate how much they influenced us." Even when he called God Only Knows a perfect song, he couldn't resist adding, "for American pop music of that period." As historian David Leaf put it, Paul respects Brian's genius, but he'll never admit how much it pushed him. That would mean admitting someone else helped shape the Beatles' evolution. And there you have it, the 6 bands that got under Paul McCartney's skin. From creative rivals to cultural shifts he couldn't stomach, even a legend like McCartney had his breaking points. Behind the charm and diplomacy lies a fierce competitor who demanded more not just from others, but from himself. So, which of these feuds surprised you most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into rock history, hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories from the world of music.